Hello and welcome back to CC Languages Beginners course. Today we have lesson number 3. So lesson number 3 is all about the numbers in Spanish. It's not really the most entertaining of lessons, but it's a very important lesson. It's a little bit like our first lesson, where we needed to know all the sounds in Spanish to be able to start to use different words, understand words back. This is kind of the same here with lesson number 3, where we need the numbers for many different things, giving phone numbers, writing phone numbers down, order numbers. If you've ordered something, there could be a million reasons why you might need to know the numbers in Spanish, your house number, registration number of your car, so many different things. So let's get started and let's try to make it as easy and light-hearted as possible. So here today on the screen, we have our lesson number 3, our numbers, and we're going to get started straight away with our first number, which is 0. In Spanish, we would say cero. So remembering back to lesson 1, the th sound for the C, cero is 0. Quite an easy one to remember, very similar to English. And then what I've done is I've grouped the numbers into certain groups where I think it will be easier to memorize the numbers in that way. So even if you watch this lesson and take it in stages, do one group, come back, learn the next one, or just have a practice with one group and then come back to the next group later on, that would be great. So our first lessons, first number, 1 to 10. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's just check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4, we can see the CU in Spanish. If we think back to lesson 1, always makes a Q sound, like a cuatro. Then we've got the C followed by the I, cinco. And then we've got uno, which is an interesting one. Many people ask me, oh, I've heard una. What's una? Why is it uno? What's una? So una would be the feminine version of uno. This would only happen with this number here, with number 1. It doesn't happen anywhere else. But because number 1 comes up a lot in conversation, meaning in Spanish a. For example, I would say, if I'm counting something, I would always say, no matter what the object is, if it's masculine or feminine, that's completely irrelevant. I would just count 1, 2, 3, always like that when I'm referring to uno as 1. But if I'm referring to uno, as in Spanish, a or a, that could be masculine or feminine. For example, if I say in Spanish the word persona, person, and I want to say one person, because persona is with an a and it's feminine, we wouldn't say a person, one person, uno persona, we would say una persona. You'll start to see that as our sentences grow in Spanish, that everything follows through. So if we're using a feminine, the word before it would be in feminine also. Then if we're describing the person and we're adding an extra word, that would also be in feminine. Una persona, for example, una persona simpática. Simpático in Spanish is friendly. So we would also use there again the feminine, and we would follow through with the a. Una persona simpática. A, or a, y a. Y in Spanish meaning and. That will pop out in a moment with our numbers too. So number 1, uno, referring to 1 as a, uno or una. That is when we could use the feminine version if we're using it in a sentence to name an object or a person. If we said, for example, una cerveza, a beer. Una cerveza. We can see the A's again, so it would be feminine. one beer or a beer, una cerveza. Or if you wanted to use the masculine to say one or a, we would say un. Un coche, one car or a car. But if we're strictly counting, uno, dos, tres, we would always use uno. Okay, so number one, uno. One or a masculine, un, when it's followed by a word. And one or a feminine, una. These will always be when a word is following completely on its own, just as a number uno. This is something you might hear with prices as well. For example, un euro. 1 euro in Spanish, we would say un euro. And the reason we would say that is because we're following un with another word, and we would say un euro. Sounds very different to to English euro, euro. If you think of the e and the u from lesson 1, euro. Okay, so that's the only thing I think that could possibly cause a little bit of difficulty at first with the numbers 1 to 10. But I'm sure with a bit of practice, it will be fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Remembering the V is like a soft B, 9, and then the Z is a th sound, 10. Then I've grouped the next group of numbers 11 to 19. So basically anything after 10 right through all the teens just before 20 in one group. This, in my opinion, is the hardest group because it doesn't really follow a strict rule, whereas the rest of the numbers from 20 all the way to 100 have their own rules, which once you know the rule are very, very easy to follow. So these ones for me are a little bit trickier, but I'm sure we can get there too. Let's have a look. We've got 11, 12, remembering the sound because the C is followed by an E, 13, 14, 15. And as you can see, these really are, there's some similarities with the endings, but these really are a question of practicing and memorizing. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Then we've got the dieces. Now this is a very important letter with the numbers, the letter I here. So as I mentioned a moment ago, in Spanish, the word for and is y, which is just spelt with a Y, y. Like when we look back at lesson 2 and we do, how are you? ¿Cómo estás? Muy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? ¿Y tú? And you? This y tú is the and, isn't it? It's and you. So that's something to really bear in mind. With the numbers, there's a slight change, and the E is spelt with an I, but it means the exact same thing. So really what this is 10 and 6, 10 and 7, 10 and 8, 10 and 9. There's been a slight change of the spelling. You can see the DF here has the Z, whereas here it has the C. So really, if you break it down, we've got 10 and 6. And then here again, we could do the same, 10 and 7, 10 and 8, remembering the E is an and, the DF is a 10, and then we've got our 6, 7, 8, and 9 on the ends. 16, 17, 18, 19. This can also really help breaking it down if you're, depending on how you are with your pronunciation in Spanish, if you're finding it a little bit tricky, it always helps to break the word down. 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, let's put these back together for now. And there we go. Okay, fantastic. Back to normal. And that's something we can do if you print out your document before or after the lesson. You could highlight it or break it down, or if you want to use it, do that on the computer. That would also be a good idea. Okay, so the next categories are actually quite shocking. So I've got one which is just 20 to 29, and then a massive jump, 30 all the way to 100. So really, all of the numbers 1 to, well, 0 to 100 are broken down into one group, two groups, 3 and 4. So really only 4 groups to learn all of the numbers to 100 isn't too bad. 20. 20 in Spanish is 20, remembering the soft B, and make sure we get all of the sounds in. Let's not try and rush the vowel sounds. So we've got 20. When I say don't rush it, I don't mean to do long sounds. We know that if we look back at the previous lessons, the vowel sounds in Spanish are very sharp, a, e, I, o, u. But what I say when I say don't rush it, what I mean is that you make sure you can hear the E and the I and the E on the end. 20, 20. A lot of people try to rush it and they're missing something out here and they're doing like 20, something like that, rather than the 20. 20. Really hear the E, 20. Okay, so 20, 20, and remembering that the I in this case means and, we're doing the same as the last bit of the teens, where we've got 20 and 1. 21. ¿Qué pasa? What's up? What's the thing? ¿Qué pasa? What's happening here is that it's all in one word. So we're doing the 20 and 1, but we're pushing it together into one word. So we would read it 21. 21. Then we've got 22, the 20 and 2, all together in one, 22. 23, 23. 24, 25, 26, 27. 21, 22. You can read these out just before me. Muy bien, 23. ¿Qué número? What number is this one? Muy bien, 24. What about the next? Muy bien, correcto, correct, 25. 26. 27. 28. 29. If you've got time to say that twice in the video, you can say it twice, if not just once. Okay, so really remember that the I here is the and, it's E, and it's all in the 20s pushed together. This is the rule for the 20s. So the rule for the 20s is I say 20 and the units, but I say it all together. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Fantástico, perfecto. Okay, good with the 20s. So now really the same rule applies for all the numbers, all the way from 30 to 99. The rule is that I take the tens, I put an and I put the units on the end. So what we don't need to do is have a massive list of all the numbers, all the 30s, all the 40s. All we need to know is our first block, our first category here, 1 al 10, 1 to 10. And then our last block here. And then 100 would be an exception. So 100 is once again just one word that we would need to memorize. 100, 100, 0, 0, 100, and then following our little rules. This for me is the easiest part because it's the same rule for 30, 40, 50, 60 all the way through. I don't have to remember, am I pushing the word together or anything like that? So let's get in with the 30s. Let's get started. 30. 30. So if I wanted to say in Spanish 31, following the rule that I've just mentioned, I would say what would I say? I would say, have you got it already? 31. So I would take from the top my ones all the way down to the 9. And I would just literally look, which one am I using? Oh, I'm using uno. 31. Remembering that the Spanish word for and is y. Sometimes we can find it in words spelt with an I, pushed together, but when it's separate, we will always find it with a Y. 31. So what about if I wanted to say 32? 32. 33, 33. And that would be all the way through. 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. That would be how I build the 30s, and I would do exactly the same with the 40s. I would say 40, and I would add the endings. For example, 44, how would I say that in Spanish? 44. 44. 41. 41. 42. 42. So I'm just taking the 40 and adding 40 and 1, 40 and 2, 40 and 3. Okay, I would do exactly the same. Like I said, all of this column, we would keep doing the same. 50, 50. 50. How would I say 57? 57. 57. This is something you can do where if you want to pause the video, you can pause it and have a look. You can watch it as many times as you like. So really, the number video is something you can break down into little sections, come back to. It's not something that you need to learn in one sitting. I would do the same then with my 60s. 60, 61, 62. I'm not going to do the whole list because that's going to become very boring as long as we know how to pronounce these here and our first ones. So as long as we can pronounce correctly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then our numbers here, I'm not going to repeat every single 61, 62, 63, all the way into 90 from 30. 30, 40, 50, 60. Now these ones are ones to be a little bit careful with, 60 and 70, because as you can see, the spelling is very, very similar. There's literally only one letter difference. So we'll just make a little bit of emphasis when we're saying 60, we'll make sure that the s is quite strong. And then 70, we would say 70, and just really make sure we get the T in there. But this is even for natives and bilingual people, one that you sometimes have to listen out for. If somebody says, oh, 60, oh, 60 or 70, 60 or 70, which one are you saying? It's one that when you're writing a phone number down, you have to be quite careful with. So imagine you want to say 70, 70, and you just want to really get your point across to the person that it's 70, not a 60. You could say 70, 70, 70, 70, or 60, 60, 60, 60. Then we have 80, 80, and the last one, 90. Not forgetting 100, 100. Let's do those one last time. Let's do 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Okay, great. Let's practice a few numbers. This is something you can pause, you can watch whenever you like. These are literally just a mix of numbers off the top of my head. So let's see. ¿Qué número tenemos aquí? 23, 23. 64. 23, 64. Aquí tenemos 23, 64, 52, 68, 68, 100, 5, 0. This is something you could also do with your lesson where you could say, oh, I'm just going to pause this lesson. I'm going to write some random numbers down and see if I can say them already, or just scroll back a little bit on the video to see which ones I'm missing, or, you know, rewatch a part. That would be great. Okay, I'm going to share the screen again. And we're going to go back into our numbers. Where are we? Here we are. Didn't want to come back into our numbers here. And let's have one last look at the numbers before we move on with some useful functions for them. Maybe you could try to read them first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Muy bien. 100. Okay. Let's have a little look. Sneak peek of the next lesson below. Let's have a little look at phone numbers. How would I read my phone number in Spanish? So I'm going to put a random Spanish mobile phone number. So we would say my phone number, mi número de teléfono. Mi número de teléfono. O mi número de móvil, if you wanted to say mobile. Mi número de móvil. Mi número de teléfono es, o mi número del móvil es. So my phone number is would be is. and then you would read your number. This is just a random number that I've made up. So the easiest way to read a Spanish telephone number is to do it in groups of 3, en grupos de 3, and using each number separately. So here I would read 626, 758, 639. Are there other ways of doing this? Yes. Do some people read it differently? Maybe, but most people do tend to read it like this, and I think it's the easiest way to give your number, so there's no confusion. If I were to say here 75, and the other person understands 65, the 65 rather than 75, then they've not got my number correctly. This is something we might need if we're having something delivered to our house, where they call us beforehand. So it's quite important that we get it across the easiest way possible. 626, 758, 639. 789, 154, 082. Another number that we could use. Most of the Spanish mobile numbers start with 6s or 7s. Then you've got numbers depending on the area that might start with 96 or 8 something. 86, really depending on the region. Let me make up a landline number. So if I wanted to read this, I would do exactly the same as before. I would do it in groups of 3, and I would say 968, 134, 456. Another number, 679, 150, 828. It really does depend on the person. If you wanted to say 679, 15, 08, 28, you could do that if it's just easier for you to say the 15, rather than breaking it 1508. It depends, but this is a perfectly acceptable way. It's a way that Spanish people use to give their numbers, and it's really not a problem at all. I think it's definitely the most common way. So if you want to do it like that, you can, but there's not really a set rule of how to read a number. That would just be my recommendation. Okay. Other ways that we might want to use our numbers are with prices. So if you wanted to ask how much something is, we could say, ¿Cuánto es? How much is it? ¿Cuánto es? Or we could ask, how much does it cost? ¿Cuánto cuesta? ¿Cuánto es? Or ¿cuánto cuesta? Or if we wanted to be really, really native, we could say, ¿Cuánto vale? We've seen vale, the word vale on its own is okay. But if we look at vale from the verb valer in Spanish, it actually means value. What value does it have? It's a strange way of asking how much it costs, but it's a way that we can use in Spanish. You might even hear, if you're going to a Spanish market and you're hearing other people talking, ¿Qué vale? What's it worth? Meaning, how much is it? ¿Cuánto es? ¿Cuánto cuesta? ¿Cuánto vale? ¿Qué vale? I would probably just say, ¿Cuánto es? Stick to a simple option. But if I do hear the other ones, at least I know what they mean, which is fantastic to be understanding a lot more when we're out and about listening to Spanish. ¿Cuánto es? ¿Cuánto cuesta? ¿Cuánto vale? ¿Qué vale? So now, how much is it? Let's think. We have euros. In Spanish, we would say euro or euros, and then cents in Spanish, or céntimos, céntimos. So imagine it's 20 euros. I would say 20 euros. 20 euros. Or it's 35 euros, 35 euros. Or it's a little bit more, it's 175 euros, 175 euros. Bear in mind that it will sound a little bit faster in conversation. 175 euros, 35 euros, 20 euros, a little bit faster. But that's something we can work towards. Then cents. Imagine I've been out for tapas and a drink and it's 20 euros 50 cents. I would say 20 euros 50 or 20 50. We don't need to keep saying the euros and the cents. We know what currency we're in Spain. So you could just say, or you would just hear 20 50 or 20 euros 50 if you wanted to say all of it. 20 euros 50 céntimos. And then there's another little word that I'm going to add to this, which is the word in Spanish con, which means with. Not always, but sometimes people will say in Spanish 20 with 50, 35 with 90. So they might say 20 con 50 or 35 con 90. It's not something we use in English, but it's something that if you hear in Spanish, you're like, what's con? Why is it in the middle of the numbers of the price? So sometimes in Spanish, you'll hear 35 with 90, meaning 35 euros with 90 cents. It's just a different way of wording things. So listen out to your prices next time you're in the supermarket and have a practice with those. A lot of the time also now you can see them on the till. You can see the prices already. But if you see it, try to think in Spanish before you hear it told to you what it is. So 20 con 50 or 20.50, 20 con 50 céntimos, 20 euros con 50 céntimos. It really depends if you want to say the euros and the cents. It's not necessary. Maybe it's something you'd hear more at the markets if something is so many euros, so many cents per kilo. So we would say por kilo or per gram, por gramo. Maybe that's when you would hear more the céntimos, especially if it's the grams. Obviously, they're making their money by weight, so every cent would count. Euros, céntimos, con, por kilo y por gramo. Okay, well, I think that's a lot to practice. We've got all of our numbers from 0 a 100, from 0 to 100. We've got some prices to get practicing with, some telephone numbers, and all of the numbers in general. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in lesson number 4. Adiós, hasta luego, muchas gracias. Adiós.